Do you believe time teaches respect? I used to believe that too, until I discovered that age doesn't shield us from humiliation. Sometimes, it makes us more of a target. The truth is harsh. The very people who should defend us are often the ones who drag us into ridicule. Most people think our greatest enemies come from outside, but that's not true. The deepest pain comes from within family bonds, where love is supposed to be the foundation. And when your own son decides to mock his father in front of everyone, what's left? Silence, shame, or the chance for an unexpected twist. That's when someone walked in uninvited, a daughter no one even knew existed. And what she carried in her hands wasn't just her presence. It was evidence that changed everything in seconds. What happened next proved one thing: dignity can be denied for a time, but it can never be destroyed. I remember that night clearly. Dinner started like any other, but it ended as a trial by fire for my soul. Sitting among family, the very people who should have been a source of respect and support, I felt the weight of humiliation carved into the sound of cruel laughter. Betrayal hurts less when it comes from outsiders, because at least you expect the blow. But when it comes from within, when it's your own child mocking you, the impact is devastating. And in that moment, life forces you to decide, stay silent or turn the pain into a lesson. I chose to watch before I acted. Funny thing, the ones who should protect us are often the first to expose our weaknesses. Jason, my oldest son, made sure to laugh at my age, my mistakes, the things I saw as simple signs of time passing. The room filled with awkward chuckles, and I saw in my relatives' eyes the cowardice of pretending not to hear. It's the same old story. When pressure rises, few have the courage to defend what's right. That's when I realized dignity isn't begged for, it's demanded. My silence wasn't defeat, it was strategy. People often mistake quiet for weakness, don't they? But I had already faced bigger losses: widowhood, long cold nights alone, bills that didn't add up at the end of the month. That night's humiliation was just another test, and I had already learned, when respect is denied, the wisest revenge is patience, because sooner or later, life delivers answers no one can silence. As Jason kept talking, I noticed something important. Not everyone laughing was cruel. Some just didn't know how to react. Others laughed, only to blend in, like kids in a classroom, afraid to cross the popular boy. That taught me not to hate them all, but to recognize how poor education within families breeds adults who confuse mockery with power. That party of humiliation became a stage of lessons, because deep down I knew every word of scorn was like a brick, building a wall between us. But walls don't only divide, they also protect. That thought kept me steady, reminding me that sometimes the best revenge isn't to strike back, but to let life reveal the wrongs on its own. If you've ever been through something like this, someone mocking your pain, your choices, your story, remember this: your reaction can shape the future of the relationship. If you explode, you fuel the scene. If you stay silent, you create space for reflection. I chose silence, not out of fear, but because I knew the tables would turn. Like a chess game, the weakest piece can be the one that topples the king in the end. That night, I felt the strangest paradox. The more Jason laughed at me, the more I saw that he wasn't humiliating me. He was exposing himself. His lack of respect didn't erase my dignity. It only revealed his own lack of it. That's the irony of betrayal inside a family. The one who humiliates thinks they're winning, but in truth, they're sinking in their own poison. And I knew it was only a matter of time before something, or someone, brought the truth to light. You know what I've realized? Life is like a play, where the main character pretends to be fragile until the exact moment of revealing their strength. Age, scars, and setbacks taught me that. I've seen people laugh at poverty and later beg for food. I've seen people mock an old worker and years later depend on his advice to keep their lives from falling apart. Time is a silent judge, but an infallible one. The most painful part of that night wasn't Jason's mockery, but the indifference of those around me. No one defended me. No one said, "Enough, this is humiliation." But I turned that silence into fuel, because if even family kept quiet, then it was up to me to prove that dignity doesn't need an audience to exist. And that certainty kept me standing tall. Jason's laughter echoed loudly, but inside I repeated, "The respect he denies me, life will return double." My father used to say, "Those who plant disdain will harvest loneliness." Jason didn't understand it yet, but he would, because even the most arrogant sons eventually learn. Today's humiliation becomes tomorrow's shame. Maybe you're thinking, but how can you stay quiet while being mocked? Believe me, it's hard. I also wanted to rise up, to shout, to slam the table and expose the secrets I held, but I knew. Every revelation has its time. Every document has its moment to be shown. And that night, the time hadn't come yet. Sometimes what feels like the end is just the first act of a bigger story. Have you noticed how small family jabs can turn into lifelong wounds? A comment about your clothes, a joke about your age, a criticism about your choices. Harmless at first, but repeated over the years, it turns into stored-up humiliation. That's what I lived that night. But deep inside, I knew this story wasn't ending there. Life always brings an unexpected character to flip the script. And here's the most powerful part, turning pain into an example. If someone in your family laughs at you, take it as proof they don't yet understand the value of respect. Show through your behavior that dignity isn't shaken by words. I've seen people who refused to shrink under humiliation grow so strong that others were forced to change their posture. That's what I decided to do. Let life justify me. Dinner went on. Wine kept pouring into glasses. But in my heart, only one question burned. Who will be the instrument of change? Because I already knew the truth always finds its way out. And when it does, no laughter survives, no mockery endures. Betrayal may shout, but justice always speaks louder. That night, while Jason laughed out loud, I only smiled on the inside, because I knew something was about to happen. Something that would change not only the way he saw me, but the way the entire family looked at me. And that change wouldn't come from me, but from someone who was about to arrive. The dinner was tense when the living room door opened, and a young woman no one recognized walked in. Silence fell instantly. The clinking of silverware stopped, and even Jason's laughter froze in the air. She introduced herself with quiet strength. My name is Sophia, and at that moment, I realized life had just brought an unexpected witness into my story. Has it ever happened to you? Someone showing up out of nowhere and completely shifting the course of events? That's exactly how I felt. While Jason was still ridiculing me, that stranger, with steady eyes and a presence that radiated respect, carried with her a mystery. The entire family was in shock, expecting just another ordinary dinner. But her arrival turned humiliation into the beginning of revelation. Then she said something that stole the air from the room. I'm William's daughter. Can you imagine the impact? Jason let out a nervous chuckle, not sure whether to confront or ignore it. The others were speechless, and I, who had long carried the truth deep inside, knew that this was the moment the past would finally knock at the door. The whole family was about to face a secret. I've always believed family is like a garden. Some only see the flowers, but they know nothing of the roots that hold everything together. Sophia was one of those hidden roots, born of an old story, of a love left in the past, but one that left marks. Some would call it betrayal. I saw it as destiny, and now, in front of everyone, that forgotten chapter of my life revealed itself in the most unexpected way. Jason tried to mock me again. Another story you made up, Dad? But Sophia didn't flinch. She carried herself with a quiet power, like someone who didn't need to prove anything, only to show it. Respect was in her eyes, firmness in her voice. That's when I realized something important. Sometimes the freedom we need doesn't come from our own hands, but from someone sent at the right moment. Have you noticed how, at certain turning points, people appear in our lives with a clear mission? They're not there by chance. Sophia hadn't come to join a family dinner. She had come to be the breaking point. It felt like destiny had placed in front of me a daughter who not only carried my blood, but also carried a purpose. And that purpose was about to turn the tables on Jason. The whole family watched in silence. Emotion filled the room, but no one dared interrupt. Even the harshest critics, the ones who always tried to find fault in my words, were paying close attention. Because when truth arrives with such force, even skeptics go quiet. And I could see in Sophia's eyes, she hadn't come empty-handed. More was about to be revealed. Strangely, instead of feeling exposed for having my secret uncovered, I felt peace. It was as though the weight of years of silence was finally beginning to lift. The dignity that had so often been crushed by mockery now found a breath of relief. It wasn't revenge yet, but it was the beginning of liberation. And that liberation came through the firm voice of a daughter few even knew existed. Jason, flustered, tried to change the subject, but nobody was listening to him anymore. Sophia had captured every eye in the room. Have you noticed how truth works? It doesn't need shouting. It doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need exaggeration. It simply stands on its own. And that's how, in front of everyone, my story began to take on new colors. I smiled discreetly, remembering something I always say. The secrets we keep may one day become our greatest defense. That's exactly what happened to me. For years, I kept Sophia's existence hidden, believing it was safer that way. But now, in the midst of humiliation, I realized that silence was about to become my shield. Sophia walked to the table and pulled out a chair as if she had always belonged there. Her natural ease unsettled Jason, who was clearly losing control of the situation. It's interesting, isn't it? True respect doesn't have to be begged for. It simply happens. Dignity attracts attention. Those without it have to shout. And that contrast began to shift the whole atmosphere of the room. I thought to myself, life is ironic. The son who worked so hard to humiliate me was now forced to watch the arrival of someone who embodied the hidden part of my story. It felt as though destiny had prepared this very moment to balance the scales. Jason always believed he could ridicule me without consequence, but with every word Sophia spoke, that power slipped away from him. Have you ever been in a moment where everything seemed lost, and suddenly the tables turned? That's what Sophia's arrival was for me. The emotion I felt is hard to describe. It wasn't just the shock of meeting a daughter, but the realization that she carried with her something greater, the mission of restoring my dignity before them all. The stairs crossed, the silence grew heavy, but inside me burned a new fire. It was as though that banquet of humiliation had only been setting the stage for something extraordinary. Sophia wasn't there as a bystander. She carried something with her, something that would completely redefine the night. Deep down, I already knew. Whatever she was about to pull from her bag would be the turning point. And in that instant, before she even revealed a thing, I felt the energy shift. Jason wasn't laughing anymore. The others weren't pretending anymore. Everyone was waiting. And I knew the young woman who had walked in as a stranger was about to prove that the biggest secrets don't stay hidden forever. Sophia took a deep breath, and without hurry, drew an old leather folder from her bag. The metallic click of the clasp echoed through the room, and everyone held their breath. Have you noticed how the smallest gestures can carry more weight than the loudest shouts? That folder, simple at first glance, seemed to hold not just papers, but entire destinies. And in that instant, I realized my life was about to be rewritten before their eyes. Jason tried to laugh again, but the sound came out forced, almost broken, like someone telling a bad joke to escape the unbearable silence. The irony was that the more he mocked, the more attention shifted to Sophia, because real respect doesn't force itself. It flows naturally from what has substance, and the weight of truth was sitting right there, inside that mysterious folder. She opened it and spread several documents across the table. The sound of paper sliding against wood only deepened the suspense. I looked at each face and saw the mix of curiosity and disbelief. Have you ever felt that moment when it seems like everyone in the room is holding their breath at the same time? That's exactly what happened. The dinner that began in humiliation had just turned into a silent courtroom. Inside the folder were old photographs, yellowed letters, and documents that connected my life to a past no one knew. It was as if each page was a piece of me, carefully preserved across decades. There were memories, choices, and even mistakes. But above all, there was proof that I was not the fragile man Jason tried to portray in front of the family. Have you ever kept something hidden for so long that when you finally reveal it, it feels almost unreal? That's how I felt watching Sophia handle those papers. Each sheet represented a chapter I had chosen to silence, not out of shame, but to avoid family disputes. Sometimes, hiding isn't cowardice, it's protection. But that night, I realized that silence was turning into a weapon against the humiliation I had suffered. Jason shifted in his seat, arms crossed, trying to mask his unease. This doesn't prove anything, he muttered. But deep down, everyone knew. No one brings out a leather folder that old without a reason. And in that moment, I learned something important. Truth, when it arrives, doesn't need elaborate speeches. It only needs to show up. It's like a receipt, undeniable. Sophia revealed an old contract, my name signed in bold letters. Jason glanced at it, then quickly looked away. The weight of that single document was heavier than all his mockery minutes before. It's remarkable how dignity can be restored in seconds when proof replaces words. At that moment, I felt the tide beginning to turn. I remembered something I often say. Documents aren't just paper. They're silent witnesses. They can outlast generations and still carry weight. How many families fight over a deed, a will, a letter, Those fragile pieces of paper can shape entire destinies. And that's exactly what Sophia laid on the table. Witnesses that could not be silenced. Jason tried to laugh again, but no one joined him. The shame was no longer mine. It was his. Have you ever watched someone's mask begin to slip? It's uncomfortable, even for the onlookers. That's when I realized I was no longer the target of humiliation. Jason was. He shrank under the weight of what he couldn't deny. Every eye scanned the papers. Some whispered. Others sat frozen in silence. I knew the impact would be strong, but I hadn't expected it to be so immediate. It was like tossing a stone into a lake. The ripples spread and touched everyone. That mysterious folder didn't just hold my past, it was reshaping my family's future perception of me. Sophia looked at me with steady eyes as if to say, "Now is the time." And I understood that her presence wasn't coincidence. It was destiny. There are moments in life when the unexpected becomes the answer. And that answer came through a daughter who had lived in the shadows for years, but appeared to restore my respect. Have you noticed how truth unsettles those who thrive on lies? Jason, who only minutes earlier felt like the king of the table, now looked like a stranger in his own home. It's astonishing how quickly power shifts. That old leather folder was just an object, yet at that moment, it became a symbol of justice. Each document Sophia pulled out was like an arrow piercing Jason's arrogance. There was no escape, no way to pretend it wasn't happening. His mockery had lost its audience, its force, and inside me, an emotion long dormant began to grow. The certainty that my dignity was being restored. Slowly, I noticed the other relatives looking at me differently. They no longer saw just the aging man who had been the butt of jokes, but someone with a story none of them had known. It's incredible how one revelation can rewrite the way people see you, and I knew there was still more in that folder than they had seen. The night carried on under heavy suspense. Jason had no laughter left, only a sheen of cold sweat. All eyes were on Sophia, curiosity mounting. Deep down, everyone knew that first document was just the beginning. More truths were hidden, and they were about to surface. When Sophia spread more papers across the table, a chill ran down my spine. These weren't just keepsakes. They were contracts, records, signatures linking my name to something far greater. Decades ago, I had helped found a company, but I chose silence. Do you know why? Because I wanted to preserve peace in the family, not spark conflict. But now, the price of silence was coming due. I never saw myself as a rich man, only as someone who believed in hard work. In my youth, I invested my savings in a project most thought too ambitious. Some called me a dreamer, others a fool, but I pressed forward, believing in what I was building. The result? That small venture grew, flourished, and became a silent empire. Jason's eyes widened as he realized what he was reading. There was no room for laughter now. The signatures, the seals, the contracts left no doubt. I had been co-founder of a fortune none of them had ever imagined. Isn't it ironic? The family had seen me as outdated, the subject of ridicule. But the truth was, while they laughed, I carried a story of dignity and perseverance. Have you ever wondered how many people around you are hiding extraordinary secrets? The quiet neighbor might be the man who funded hospitals. The modest teacher might be the mind behind a project that saved thousands. Never underestimate someone's silence. They might not be hiding failures, but victories. And that was my reality. Emotion overwhelmed me. I wanted to speak, but my voice faltered. It's like holding back a lifetime of words, only to be forced to release them all at once. The heart races, the throat tightens, but I knew there was no hiding anymore. Sophia's steady gaze demanded that I tell the truth before everyone. And in that moment, there was no turning back. I took a deep breath and said, "Yes, it's true. I helped found that company, but I chose never to speak of it, to prevent wars within this family." The silence was instant. Some gasped, others lowered their heads, ashamed of having laughed minutes earlier. It's amazing how one revelation can flip the entire mood of a room in seconds. Jason, however, couldn't accept it. He muttered things like, "This is fake. It's an exaggeration." But I knew, the greater the arrogance, the harder it is to face the truth. And that's where silent revenge lives, when dignity speaks louder than any outburst. I didn't need to defend myself in fury. The documents did it for me. Do you know what I've learned over the years? That true wealth isn't just money, but the serenity of knowing you've built something worthy. And that kind of wealth cannot be mocked. They can laugh at your clothes, your age, your simple ways, but they can't erase the story written in contracts, papers, and accomplishments. And that's what I began to realize at that dinner. As everyone flipped through the documents, my mind drifted back to the effort of those years. Sleepless nights, cheap coffee, meetings crammed into small rooms. Every signature on those pages represented sweat, tears, and faith. What moved me most was that I didn't just see financial value there. I saw reminders of who I had been, and more than that, a reminder of who I still was. Then Sophia said, "He never wanted recognition, only respect." Those words hit the table like hammers. That was it exactly. I never needed applause. All I ever wanted was dignity in my own home. But ironically, it was outsiders who had always recognized my worth more than those who carried my last name. Jason couldn't handle the scene. His fingers drummed nervously on the table, as if searching for an escape. But there was none. His betrayal, exposing me to ridicule, had turned against him. Because while mocking an old man, he was discovering he had also been mocking a millionaire co-founder. Funny how life always finds a way to give back what was stolen, isn't it? I looked around the table and said, "I stayed silent to protect you, but now I see that silence can also create distance." It was a hard truth, but an honest one. How many times in trying to avoid conflict do we end up feeding ingratitude? I realize now that my silence had given space for humiliation. Have you ever lived that contradiction? Keeping something hidden out of love, only to watch it turn against you. It's a cruel dilemma, but even that had a purpose, because liberation doesn't come only from what we hide, but from the courage to reveal it when the time comes. And my time had come, right there, in front of everyone. Eyes darted, hands trembled, but there were no more doubts. The truth was out, and still, I knew this was only the beginning. Restored dignity isn't sealed by documents alone. It has to be confirmed in how we face the next accusations. And Jason wasn't ready to accept defeat. It was at that very moment, as I was regaining my composure, that I realized the night was only beginning. Jason wouldn't back down easily, and Sophia seemed to be holding something even stronger in reserve. My voice came out shaky, as if each word carried the weight of decades. Speaking the truth in front of them wasn't easy. Have you ever felt your throat lock up when you had to say something important? That's how it was for me. I knew I couldn't hide anymore, but I also knew that every sentence opened an old wound. I looked at the faces around the table. Some stared in shock, others with regret, some still in disbelief. Emotion overwhelmed me, but it wasn't anger, it was release. Because years of enduring humiliation in silence had taught me the value of patience. And in breaking my silence, I realized revenge wasn't about hurting anyone. It was about showing dignity. Jason, however, couldn't bear it. He leaned forward, accusing me of making up stories just to draw attention. Have you noticed how those who humiliate the most are also the ones who resist the truth the hardest? That's what was happening. While my voice trembled with emotion, his grew louder with arrogance. And that contrast made it clear who carried dignity and who carried desperation. I took a deep breath and said, "I chose silence to protect the family, but enduring betrayal quietly doesn't mean I have no worth." The words tore out of me, as if my heart itself was speaking. And in that instant, I realized something powerful. The tears running down my face weren't weakness, they were strength. Because sometimes emotion is the truest way to prove the truth. Have you ever had to swallow insults just to avoid a fight? It's a painful choice. Many think silence is cowardice, but those who hold their tongue know how much it costs. The silence I kept all those years wasn't fear, it was love. But like all love without recognition, it had turned into pain. And now, that pain finally had a voice. Jason laughed, trying to break the scene, but it was nervous laughter, hollow, without echo. I had learned to recognize when humiliation no longer finds an audience, and that night, no one was laughing with him. It was like a play. When the actor loses the audience, all that remains is an empty stage. And Jason, no matter how hard he tried, was no longer the lead. Do you know what's liberating? When you finally say the words you've carried inside for so long. I told them how I had endured the jokes about my age, the whispered criticisms, the small gestures of contempt, because I believed family mattered more than my pride. But when Jason made my pain public, I realized humiliation was no longer sacrifice. It was injustice, and injustice demands a response. My voice faltered, but each word cut through the air. I said, I never wanted applause, only respect. And it was as if the whole room froze to reflect. Because everyone knew respect is the foundation of coexistence, yet few were willing to give it. That's when I realized my battle wasn't just against Jason, but against a silent culture of disdain that had taken root in the family. Have you ever realized how respect can be more valuable than fortune? Money buys comfort, but not dignity. I could have shown those documents years ago, but I didn't, because I wasn't interested in proving greatness. I wanted genuine family bonds. The problem is, when there's no reciprocity, even the noblest silence turns into pain. As I spoke, I saw tears in the eyes of some relatives, maybe regret, maybe shock, but I knew in that moment they finally saw the truth. It wasn't a broken old man speaking, but someone who had endured out of love, and enduring in silence takes more courage than any open fight. Jason, meanwhile, raised his voice, insisting it was all manipulation. It's strange how arrogance always tries to smother dignity, but the louder he shouted, the clearer it became that my silence had been strategic, because now, every accusation of his only deepened the sympathy others felt for me. Then I shared something I had never said before. I carried the pain of losing your mother in silence, and maybe that's why I stayed quiet about so many other things. That confession made the room even heavier, because this wasn't just about business, contracts, or wealth. It was about the journey of a man who chose to carry burdens alone so others wouldn't have to, and that choice now revealed its true meaning. Have you ever heard someone say that crying is weakness? I believe the opposite. Crying is the purest proof of humanity. That night, my trembling voice and tears didn't show fragility. They showed authenticity. And authenticity has the power to strip away any mask. Even the mask of arrogance Jason tried to wear. The atmosphere shifted. The laughter and mockery had disappeared, replaced by silent respect. I could see in their eyes that finally, my voice, even cracked, was being heard. Because truth, when spoken with raw emotion, reaches farther than any cold speech. And I knew this was only the beginning of the turning point. It was at that moment, while everyone hung onto my broken voice, that Sophia stepped forward. I didn't know it yet, but what she carried in her hands had the power to change the night forever. Jason couldn't take it anymore. He shot up from his chair, slamming his hands on the table, and started accusing me of being a liar. His voice thundered through the room like a storm out of control. Have you ever noticed how those who fear the truth always hide behind shouting? That's exactly what happened. His desperation was written all over him. He claimed I had made everything up, that the documents were fake, that Sophia had been manipulated. The more he spoke, the clearer it became that he had no real argument. It's interesting how arrogance reveals itself through an excess of words. Have you noticed? Those who are right don't need to say much. Those who are afraid talk too much. And Jason wouldn't stop talking. The guests looked back and forth, unsure. Some wanted to believe him. Others simply couldn't anymore. Families are often like this. When betrayal surfaces, some stay quiet out of convenience. Others get lost in the noise. I could see doubt in some eyes, but I also knew the weight of my humiliation could no longer be ignored. I stayed seated, silent. I've learned the best revenge isn't to yell louder, but to let the enemy wear himself out. Jason was losing control with every word, and little by little, I saw him digging his own grave, as if he were drowning in waters he himself had stirred. Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't even need to defend yourself, because the other person did it for you? That's what I lived that night. Jason tried to destroy me with accusations, but in the process, he only destroyed his own image. Guests no longer saw a son exposing his father. They saw a man unraveling, unable to understand that respect isn't won through shouting, but through dignity. With every sentence he screamed, my calm grew stronger. Patience has a way of disarming those who try to humiliate us. I thought to myself, let him shout. The time for truth is coming. It felt like watching a storm. No matter how fierce, it always runs out of strength. And Jason, without realizing it, was close to silence. Sophia didn't waste time. While he ranted, she pulled a sealed envelope from the folder. The sound of paper tearing echoed like a gunshot through the room. All eyes turned to her, and in that instant, I realized Jason's revolt would be useless against what was about to be revealed. He tried to stop her, insisting it was all a setup, but it was too late. Sophia held something undeniable. Have you ever noticed how solid evidence has a power no voice can silence? Like when someone shows a receipt or a video, there's no argument that can stand against it, and that's exactly what was about to happen. While Jason waved his arms, accusing me of manipulation, I sat still. His frenzy contrasted with my composure. I no longer needed to prove anything. Dignity wasn't just within me anymore. It was in Sophia's hands. Every word of his only fueled the truth. I'd learned long ago that family ties are tested in moments like these. Respect is questioned. Flaws in upbringing are exposed. Masks fall away. And Jason, right there in front of everyone, showed how arrogance can't withstand facts. It was like watching a house of cards collapse with a single breath of reality. What struck me most was how the louder Jason shouted, the clearer the contrast became. I spoke little, but carried truth and emotion. He spoke endlessly, but carried only fear and shame. That lesson, I knew, wouldn't stay in that room. It would mark everyone present. Life has its own way of teaching lessons, doesn't it? Sometimes, it isn't the courtroom that delivers justice, but the dining room. That's what I experienced. Jason wanted to grind me into dust, but ended up revealing how lost he really was. And Sophia, with that envelope, showed that patience always prepares the ground for a turning point. My eyes stayed fixed on her, waiting. It felt like the weight of my entire life was about to be summed up in a single document. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation, because I knew that after this moment, there would be no more room for doubt. Jason, now sweating, still tried to convince others that none of it made sense. But it was too late. Everyone in the room knew that if proof was needed, it was about to be laid on the table. And when evidence speaks, even the loudest voices fall silent. The night pressed forward under tension and revolt. Jason shouted, but no one followed him anymore. Everyone waited for one thing, the contents of that envelope. Sophia opened it slowly, the sound of the seal tearing like thunder in the silent room. From inside, she pulled out carefully folded sheets, yellowed by time, but perfectly intact. Jason wouldn't be able to fight this. I knew it. This was the moment when humiliation would finally turn into justice. The first document was an official record. My name listed as co-founder of the company now worth millions. The guest's eyes went wide. Jason tried to laugh, but the sound died in his throat. Against truth written into the record, no mockery, survives. It was as if every letter on that page shouted louder than all the insults ever thrown at me. Next, Sophia produced a handwritten letter from my old business partner. In it, he spoke of our partnership, the sacrifices we made, and the trust he placed in me. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a testimony of life. The words, still legible, seemed to carry us back to a time when the fight was daily, and faith in the future was all we had. Jason broke into a cold sweat. His eyes, darted from face to face, looking for an ally, but no one dared defend him. Have you noticed how arrogance collapses the moment truth appears? That's exactly what happened. The mocking son was now just a lost man cornered by proof he couldn't erase. I remained silent, watching. There was no need to add anything, like in a courtroom. When the evidence is irrefutable, the lawyer doesn't need hours of arguments. The fact itself is enough, and raw truth always devastates more than fancy words. The guests, once silent accomplices to Jason's ridicule, now looked at me with respect, some even with shame for not having defended me sooner. That's the weight of betrayal. It exposes not only those who commit it, but also those who stay silent. And that night, every lowered gaze felt like an unspoken apology. Jason, desperate, still tried to claim the papers were forged. But Sophia replied firmly, "They're notarized. If you doubt it, we can confirm tomorrow." The silence that followed was heavy. There was no more escape. It's strange how lies scream loudest, right until they hit the wall of undeniable truth. My heart overflowed with emotion, not because of the wealth those papers represented, but because of what they symbolized, the restoration of my dignity. After years of being the punchline, here was proof that I wasn't the ridiculed old man Jason painted me to be, but someone who had built something meaningful, and above all, someone who had chosen silence out of love for his family. Have you ever realized that the true value of a document isn't just in the numbers, but in the history it carries? Those records weren't just about money. They told stories of sleepless nights, backbreaking work, sweat, and faith. They spoke of respect, dignity, and discipline, values Jason had yet to learn. I was moved, remembering that I could have used those papers to boast, but I never did. I chose to keep them hidden, believing my family would respect me without needing titles or figures. But life taught me a hard lesson. Sometimes the truth must be shown, or humiliation becomes the rule. And that's exactly what Sophia had done. She put my story on the table. Jason was pale, his hands trembled, lips dry. The arrogance that once fueled him was dissolving into despair. He realized he no longer controlled the narrative. The undeniable proof sat in front of everyone. Against it, denial was useless. I looked at him silently, not with anger, but with compassion, because I realized the true punishment wasn't the loss of control, but being forced to confront his own conscience. Jason would have to live with the memory of humiliating his own father, never knowing he mocked someone far greater than he imagined. Life teaches with irony, doesn't it? The son who thought he had the right to laugh at his father was now silenced by the power of a single piece of paper. As the saying goes, the pen is mightier than the sword. And that night, a simple signature dismantled all his arrogance. The room fell into absolute silence. No one dared to speak. The weight of truth hung in the air. I knew this was only one step. If humiliation had already turned to shock, the next chapter would demand something deeper, reflection on what truly matters in a family. And as Jason shrank before those papers, I realized Sophia still had more to reveal. The past had been brought into the light, but now the present demanded confrontation. The silence in the room was heavier than any word. Everyone stared at the documents, but what they carried went far beyond numbers. Sophia rose and said something simple. My father never wanted recognition, only respect. That phrase fell like a verdict, because deep down, that was all I had ever sought. I looked around and saw many lowering their eyes. It's curious how conscience weighs when dignity is laid bare. For years I had been the target of jokes, dismissed as just a tired old man. But now they saw it clearly. It wasn't weakness, it was patience. And too much patience often hides betrayals no one else notices. Jason tried to pull himself together, but he was visibly shaken. He muttered broken sentences, still trying to deny, but denial had no place anymore. Have you ever noticed how the past always finds a way to resurface, no matter how deep you try to bury it? That night proved that nothing stays hidden forever. Sophia held the papers firmly, reminding everyone what I had built in silence. She said I never sought wealth to flaunt it, but to leave behind something solid. He never needed applause. He only wanted to be respected in his own home. Those words struck deeply in every heart around that table. And that's what hurts the most. When family, meant to be a source of support, becomes a stage for humiliation. Betrayal within family bonds has the bitterest taste because it doesn't come from enemies, but from those we hold in our hearts. I learned the hard way that respect isn't automatic. It must be cultivated. Some relatives quietly wiped their eyes. Others shook their heads, weighed down by regret. Truth has a way of stirring emotion. When it arrives, it not only exposes the guilty, but also reveals those who stayed silent. That night, everyone at that table was being confronted by the weight of the past. I took a deep breath and thought, what I want isn't revenge, it's freedom. And I realized freedom doesn't come only from revealing papers, but from showing that dignity is not negotiable. I no longer needed to prove anything. The documents spoke for me. And the emotion in Sophia's eyes only reinforced that message. Jason insisted it was all exaggerated, but the more he spoke, the smaller he seemed. His arrogance no longer echoed. It was like someone trying to inflate a balloon full of holes. No matter how hard you blow, it will never hold air. Jason was exactly that, a balloon deflating in front of everyone. And I understood, in that moment, that the real humiliation wasn't the one I had endured before, but the one he was living now, because there's no punishment worse than losing credibility in front of your own family. Jason discovered that mocking the past is easy, but facing the present when it carries proof is unbearable. Then Sophia spoke words that branded themselves in everyone's memory. What hurts the most isn't the lack of money, it's the lack of respect. That sentence cut through the silence like a sermon, and I knew that's what I had been trying to express my whole life. Money can be lost, but once dignity is broken, it leaves wounds that never fully heal. I looked at Jason with serenity. There was no anger, only compassion, because I saw that his arrogance came from a lack of understanding, from emotional immaturity. He confused power with mockery, but now he was learning, in the hardest way possible, that respect can't be forced. Have you noticed how truth arrives without needing to shout? That's what I lived. I didn't need to raise my voice, didn't need to slam the table. All it took was revealing what had always been there. Life, in its irony, had made sure to show that silence is often just the prelude to a great turning point. Minute by minute, I felt the weight of humiliation giving way to something greater. It wasn't just revenge, it was liberation. Because being recognized not for wealth, but for dignity, that is the greatest victory a person can achieve within their own family. The guests were no longer the same. I saw in their eyes not only respect, but also shame. They now realized that laughing along with Jason had been a silent betrayal. That awareness forced them to reflect on how they treated the elderly, the quiet ones, the people who carried untold stories. And in that atmosphere of reflection, Sophia turned directly to Jason. There was still something to be said, something that would carry not just the weight of the past, but the key to the family's future. Sophia took a deep breath and looked straight at Jason. The silence in the room was so dense that even the ticking of the clock seemed louder. "You need to understand," she said. "The future of this family doesn't depend on you." Her words cut through the air like a blade. Jason's eyes widened in disbelief. For years he had felt like the head of the table, the natural heir. But now, in front of everyone, the truth had changed the game, and there was no way for him to take back control. Sophia held the papers like weapons of justice. "William still holds a valuable share of the company," she said. "And it's his, not yours." The words landed like hammer blows. The whole family froze. I watched in silence, heart racing, not because of the fortune, but because the message I'd begged for in silence finally had a voice. The respect I had longed for was now enforced by truth. It was freedom. Jason tried to stammer a response, but his lips shook. "Have you ever seen someone realize they've lost everything in a matter of minutes?" That was his face. The mocking son shrank before the sister he didn't even know. Sophia didn't speak with vengeance, but with resolve. Every word felt weighted with justice. "What's at stake isn't money, it's dignity," she said, and I felt proud, because that was exactly what I had always tried to teach. The guests' eyes shifted. They weren't on Jason anymore. They were on me, and for the first time, he realized he was no longer the star of the show. Arrogance had curdled into an awkward silence. I noticed discreet tears in a few eyes. Everyone understood now. The real betrayal wasn't financial, it was moral. And when morality is wounded, the cost is higher than any check. Jason lowered his head. A small gesture, loaded with meaning. The son who laughed at me minutes earlier no longer had the courage to meet my eyes. That, to me, was the deepest silent revenge. Sometimes the weight isn't in what you gain, but in what you lose. Jason wasn't just losing a slice of an inheritance. He was losing respect. And earning respect back is the hardest task of all. With a steady voice, Sophia concluded, "What he tried to ridicule is exactly what will support him in the future. If he can find humility," the words echoed. And I knew she understood the real value of all this. I stayed quiet, but inside I smiled. The freedom I had waited for was finally here, not through my own hands, but through a daughter life returned to me at the right time. Jason said nothing more. His silence was answer enough, and each passing second of quiet weighed more than every insult he had ever thrown. The whole family understood. The future wasn't in the hands of an arrogant son, but in the truth revealed. And that changed everything. From that moment on, dignity was no longer negotiable. Then, when Sophia took my hand in front of everyone, I realized the final turn was about to happen. I rose from my chair slowly, but firmly. The room that had once suffocated me with humiliation now seemed to breathe respect. I looked Jason in the eyes, and for the first time he looked away. There it was, the turn I had waited for. My voice came out strong, steady. "Respect is not for sale. It's earned." It was just 7 words, but they weighed more than every accusation before. The room dropped into a deep silence, as if everyone were waiting for the final line. Head bowed, Jason had no strength left to sneer. You know that moment when pride finally surrenders? It's like a wall collapsing from the inside out. He didn't need to say anything. His silence spoke for him. Sophia moved closer and took my hand, a simple gesture, full of meaning. In that moment, I knew the most valuable inheritance wasn't money. It was dignity, restored in plain sight. The family watched in respectful silence. I could feel something had shifted in their gaze. They no longer saw a fragile man to be mocked, but someone who, even in silence, carried the force of truth. Jason tried to hide his tears, but it was useless. Arrogance had turned into shame, and I learned right then that sometimes the greatest revenge is saying nothing more than necessary. Have you noticed how dignity can transform a room? One gesture, one sentence, one steady posture. No shouting, no humiliating in return, just truth. I lifted my chin and drew a deep breath. I felt the weight of years of humiliation dissolve. In its place rose something greater, the certainty that my story could never be reduced to ridicule. Sophia squeezed my hand tighter. In that squeeze was solidarity. It was as if life whispered, "You're not alone anymore." It was the most unexpected gift I've ever received. Jason stayed silent, unable to hold my gaze, and that was the clearest proof that dignity had won. Arrogance doesn't survive when confronted with the truth. The other relatives glanced at one another, clearly embarrassed. Some murmured apologies, others just lowered their heads. And I understood. The humiliation I had endured had become a lesson for everyone. Do you ever feel that silence teaches more than words? That's what happened. I didn't need long speeches or fights. I just had to stand up and tell the truth. A dinner that began as a stage for betrayal and mockery ended as a master class in respect. Everyone left changed, and I knew they would never look at me the same way again. Jason, the mocking son, discovered the power he thought he had was only an illusion, and I discovered that the truest inheritance is invisible. It's the dignity no one can take away. With Sophia at my side and the family in silence, everyone finally understood who I really was. Now let me ask you, how many times have you swallowed your words just to avoid conflict? How many times have you accepted humiliation inside your own family, thinking silence was better? Remember, the respect you don't insist on today may be the very respect denied to you tomorrow. Here's the simple lesson. Dignity isn't begged for, it's earned. It doesn't matter if they mock you, underestimate you, or try to reduce you. At the right moment, the truth shows up. But are you ready to stand when that moment comes? Think carefully. What would you do in my place? Would you stand your ground, or let shame speak louder? Drop your answer in the comments. Your story might open someone else's eyes. And if this story resonated with you, if it touched something you've lived through, don't wait. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week, you'll find stories here that not only move you, but teach lessons that can change your life.